obviously, as a kid, had a very strong sense of I should be a boy. And it wasn't a happy experience, but it was a very definite and clear experience. And I knew I'd be better as a boy. And I was very uncomfortable being a girl, hated being a girl. And it lasted for many, many years. And then I realised I had to pull out of it because I was a girl. And we're going into puberty at this stage. It would have started when I was about 3. And when I was in puberty, I hated my body, hated everything about me, filled with not only self-loathing, but I was a misogynist through and through. From the age of 3, everything girlish, like, was just cringe. I looked down on girls very sharply. And when I realised I had to get out of it because I had nothing... I was a girl, there was nothing I could do. Now, this would be kind of the 80s where there wasn't a conceivable, reasonable option to transition. It just wasn't a reasonable option. And so I was just stuck being who I was, and I hated being who I was. And I remember puberty was a very strong lesson in nature is bigger than you. Nature was just taking over my body. There was nothing I had. I thought my force of personality would get me through, and I realised it couldn't. And on it went, and life continued. I became comfortable in my own skin, and very, very... I remember in my 20s, every so often it would come up, and I would say something, and another woman would say, oh, I was a tomboy, and I'd go, yeah, I'm going to stop talking about that. I remember sitting in a pub thinking, I'm going to stop talking about this, because people are talking about something very playful and silly, while I'm talking about something really quite heavy and not. And I just thought, this is demeaning and dishonouring my experience, and I just need to stop talking about that. I'll just let that go. Yeah, I remember distinctly where I was sitting in a pub. So life went on. I'd become a psychotherapist in my 30s, and I'd written a few books on parenting, and I was very interested in... My first book was Cotton Wool Kids, and I was very interested in the zeitgeist and the way children were being raised and the pressures on parents and stuff like that. And just before I released my second book, Bullyproof Kids, I thought I must add my voice to this gender debate. It's all very fraught, and nobody seems to be talking about kids like me. All this trans kid stuff, and what about kids like me? So I wrote an article saying, well, I had this experience, blah, blah, blah. And there wasn't much of a response, but I was asked to do a Channel 4 film about it. And everybody had me pumped. I was a year doing that film, and this is 2018, everybody had me pumped. You're going to get attacked. Every single person I asked, should I do this film? Every single person, except my husband, every single person said, don't do it. Too fraught.
Can I ask, by the time you did the film, because the way you're painting this picture, it's almost like you had your own experience that you've obviously thought about a lot. But like when you were approached to do the film, had you already been diving into all the research about like puberty blockers and like trans kids and like social contagion? Like, were you deep in that aspect of this topic? No. Or were you more just like, if this happened to me and I got out of it, what's going to happen to all these kids?
I was the second. I was very naive insofar as of the literature. And she asked me all those questions that made me just completely go, well, now, let me think about that. And then she said something. Then she said about lesbians, and I'm not a lesbian. And I thought, oh, yeah, I can see how that would happen. Yeah, I get it. You know what I mean? It really rang very... But it was news to me. I remember it was news to me that a lesbians had anything to do with this. I remember her telling me about that. So it was all news to me. But the research she handed me was... between that and the second interview was phenomenal. The research was really, really, really good. And I discovered a world. So the questions she asked me at the start, and then the research she sent me, and I ate it up. And around about then, if I'm right, Heather Brunskill's Evans' first book was coming out. And that took my head off. It was like, that was just stop everything. Just stop everything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I was learning at that point, you know what I mean? But I came into it completely naive. But I remember immediately being overwhelmed, just like you were, this is 2018 November, by a deluge of emails. Of these long, I used to be frightened of my emails, long, harrowing stories of beautifully engaged, loving mothers, mostly mothers, I have to say, and just telling me these devastated accounts of families ripped apart, of devastated children, very distressed teenagers, really, really awful, awful things had happened, and really bad support for everybody involved. And
Yeah.
me kind of realizing, okay, wow, I didn't really anticipate any of this. I got a lot
Mm.
of contact as well from people who had medically transitioned and were what I call lost in transition. Just
Yeah.
kind of, I watched your film. I transed 10 years ago. It's very difficult. I wish I'd known what I know now. And
Mm.
I was like in this world of harrowing stories that I hadn't expected as much of. I didn't expect
Yeah.
that because of the deluge of emails. I started seeing people, but I was like, this isn't enough. This is insane. This is crazy. And I was really feeling a phobia was developing for my emails. I was like, what? I got a
Mm.
new email address and didn't stop it. So suddenly I had it coming at 2 different emails. Great. Don't do that. And so then what did I do? I remember meeting this woman. I was at the D-Trans conference in Manchester in 2019, and I met this parent who said, "Would you do a parent support group?" And I says, "Yeah, sure." Thinking, when? I have the second. At this
I
stage,
know.
I was underwater with constant demands, and not demands, but
Mm.
requests, and please, please, please,
Mhm.
please, please help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
so COVID happened, and suddenly all my engagements got cancelled. And I thought, I'll do this parent move. I'll do this parent
Oh,
group.
yeah.
Yeah. And so I started the Gender Dysphoria Support Network. It was just parent groups, just meeting. And I remember the first night I had this meeting, it was about 20 parents, all saying that devastating, harrowing, really distressing story. And I came down afterwards. I was in tears, and I wouldn't be. I'm quite hardened. I've had a long life, and I wouldn't easily go into tears. And I was in tears after I came down. The fire was on, and I was talking to my husband, and I was like, "That was just so horrendous. Like those stories, these parents, these families, they're being ripped apart." It was
Yeah.
very moving experience. I remember just downstairs, just I couldn't speak about
Mm.
what I had just experienced. I was
Mm.
like, what's happening? Something
Mm.
awful is happening.
Mm.
And so on it went, and we ended up, running the Gender Dysphoria, and it's still going. It's like Al-Anon, it runs its own groups, it's all
Mm.
parent kind of led and runs its own group. And then a
You're
year
talking
later,
about the GDSN, the Gender
GDSN,
Dysphoria
Gender
Support
Dysphoria Support. It's
Network.
great,
Yeah.
and they run themselves, and it's completely parent led, and it's a lovely, very supportive organisation. And then a year later, I realised over that year, that was 2020, COVID and all that. I thought, this is extraordinary. We need alternatives. We need an alternative to WPATH. We need an alternative. There was no other vision. There was no other
Yeah.
options. And so we started GenSpec then in 2021, and it's it's not reduced. It's just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.